That wasn't that bad of an Oscars, was it? That was a great bit here, of course, inserting himself into the substance. I think Conan did a good job as a host. Wasn't too mean spirited. Overall, had some fun gags and good jokes. There were some stinkers here and there that I can't quite remember. Who doesn't like it when they make fun of Jeff Bezos, right? Kieran Culkin's great. He's also, I think Downey Jr. felt a little bit intimidated that Culkin's gonna take his spot. Did a little joke about Culkin, like, "Oh, you're gonna take my spot as the witty guy in Hollywood." It was nice to see Flo win. Of course, that was my favorite animated movie of the year. Another example of low budget movies winning big at the Oscars. We'll be seeing a lot of that. Wicked was fun. I liked Wicked. Not like top movie of the year or anything, but it was a fun time. Did anyone notice that this backdrop here has looks like a vagina? Pretty cool though. I don't know. Baker's first win of the night, a win for original screenplay. But he does thank the sex workers here, as he's been doing on his award run.
I want to thank the sex worker community. They have shared their stories. They have shared their life experience with me over the years.
So that's good. We'll get more into Baker after we get through this. I think this is. Oh yeah, this goes to substance. Pretty good award for the substance. The makeup, it was pretty gross makeup, but I think the only last time a horror film won for makeup was The Fly, I think, maybe, which is very fitting. Speaking of the substance, Margaret Qualley here from Substance, but this Bond tribute came out of nowhere, as if like Bezos paid to remind everybody that Bond is still a thing. Also, kind of seems like a memoriam for Bond because Amazon bought the rights to Bond now, and so they're going to make a bunch of stuff. Yeah, but it's kind of weird that it's kind of like an end of an era for Bond, because now the family that owns it has a little bit less control. This was fun, fun little gag about bringing a streaming service to the theaters.
One giant smartphone.
Isabella and Laura Dern. Isabella's wearing the blue velvet in honor of David Lynch there. This is probably my favorite gag here.
Humiliate the performers on screen.
Now this is some funny production design right here. The most important win of the night is No Other Land.
Reality that we have been enduring for decades and still persist, as we call on the world to take serious actions to stop the injustice and to stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people.
You can still find the film in certain areas. You can still book some tickets. It has been screening in certain parts of the US. The thing is that they have to distribute it themselves, so that's just limits, how many screens it's going to be able to be shown on. And so the reach is limited because of that, because it's self-distributed. So that's what that means when people say it doesn't have US distribution. It's just that there's no wide distribution from a big US distributor. But hopefully, now that they won the Oscars, a US distributor will step up so it's more easily available. There was a rumor online for a second that Gal Gadot was supposed to present for Best Documentary, which would have been really awkward for her because she's a vocal supporter of the IDF. That would have been fun to see, actually. Her getting nervous as Yusuf steps up for the award. But no, that was just a fake rumor. Michelle Trachtenberg, she passed the day before Gene Hackman. I don't know. I guess she wasn't a big enough star. It's just unfortunate. And then, Tony Todd has totally been in there, of course. And this was probably the worst speech just because it went on for so long and he didn't really much say anything. Even after asking them to cut the music, it was he didn't really, say much at all. Interesting at all. And then we got the Best Actress in the leading role, which was the upset of the night. No one really saw this one. I mean, people suspected, she was definitely the second favorite here, but I think everyone pretty much expected Demi Moore to get the win here. Probably should have gotten it, more so as an award for her whole career. It does feel a little bit substance coded that, the young new star, Mikey Madison, won over the aging Hollywood actress. That definitely doesn't dispel the accusations of Hollywood rewarding young talent and being ageist and such, especially when it comes to women in the industry. But I think like probably the best part of Anora is Mikey Madison's performance. Like the substance, it's not so much a movie about the performance, but more about themes of it and the subject matter. And although Demi Moore did a good job in it, it felt like more of a broad performance. I do feel like it's deserving, even though it would have been nice to see Demi Moore up there. Okay, and this is, I guess, the big award here. At this point in the night, it was expected for Anora to get it. I won directing, I won editing, I won best screenplay. If you go back to my favorites of the year video, you'll see that Anora is the only nominee in this best picture category that I listed. Like, I would have liked to have seen a bunch of other movies be in that list, particularly I saw TV Glow, but a lot of the movies I liked never stood a chance, like The People's Joker would never have been in the nominees of best pictures. Kneecap, I don't think would ever have made it up there. And overall, it was a decent show. It wasn't horrible. Definitely could have been a lot worse. It could have been, people were fearing it was going to be an Emilia Perez sweep, and that would have really left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. I think people were rooting for the substance because of the message, the theme behind it, and the idea of a movie about a sex worker, a young sex worker, written by a man, directed by a man, winning over a movie made by a woman about, aging in Hollywood. It's not a good look. And like, I wished I enjoyed the substance more than I did. That's just my opinion. Although I do see the issues with Anora, which we'll get into. And I think over time, Anora has a bit lessened in my mind since I first saw it. There was a lot of other movies, that you can see in my favorites that didn't make it at all into the nominations, that I feel like are a lot more deserving than a film like Anora, for example. I was a bit reluctant to talk about Sean Baker's social media presence. It can be misconstrued, and he hasn't really come out and talk specifically about some of the things people were criticizing him for. So it's really hard to make a concrete judgment here, but it is concerning some of the things that have been brought to light. Like most all Sean Baker's films are about the marginalized, right? The working class, the poor, likes to shine a spotlight there because he feels like Hollywood in general doesn't tend to humanize those folks or show their point of view. Some people have criticized Sean Baker for being exploitative, exploiting these stories for his own art, perhaps his own fascination. I think in general he's not really punching down, so it probably is a net benefit for him to focus on such subject matter. And of course he focuses a lot on sex workers, or I guess you can see as an easy representation of the general oppression Americans face under capitalism. It's an easy go-to to focus on sex workers. Okay, so I guess the most alarming tweet he's liked is one about Kyle Rittenhouse, who was that kid who shot up people at a protest. It was a Tulsi Gabbard post. So this one right here. The jury got it right, finding Rittenhouse not guilty on all charges. So we see Sean Liker liking that. Sean Liker. we see Sean Baker liked this tweet. You could definitely interpret this as being like, okay, he's a right winger in secret. This was after he was found not guilty, and you could also read this as being a hard centrist, really. Maybe even a well-meaning liberal Democrat or something, right? So that's one of the things. But there are other suspicious social media activity from him. Stuff like this, typical pro-Israeli government, anti-Palestinian posts and tweets. It's not, but it's like something that you can see a centrist liberal would like, on social media, someone who's not as perhaps politically aware. This one's also alarming, liking the call to deploy National Guards against student protest. If you look at his follows, a lot of, pro-Israel's accounts. So pretty much this they call him a Zionist. Now, those likes seem to be indistinguishable from what a Zionist would also like. But again, it's not like clear evidence, that he would have referred to himself as a Zionist or align himself with Zionist. There's also other stuff like him following IDF babes, as well as following Libs of TikTok, which is a pretty repulsive conservative account. This article's points out people are questioning now whether he's romanticizing the struggles rather than addressing systemic issues. Now, according to this article, there hasn't been any response from Baker yet. I haven't seen any response from him. Perhaps now that he's won so many Oscars, it'll be brought up in interviews. But when it comes to him speaking out about politics, it seems that he comes off as pretty centrist, it would seem. In this interview with Uprocks about Red Rocket from 2021, he talks about how he wants to show how red states aren't a monolith. He wants to show how red states, aren't just full of stereotypical right-wingers, right? The both sides argument, listen to both sides, often comes from a lot of moderates who tend to be right-leaning anyways. Like in the political spectrum of the US, center typically just means, moderate right-wing. But maybe Sean leans more towards the true center here. Like in Red Rocket, there's a lot of scenes of Trump in the background. It's set during the 2016 election, running up to it. He says, I also try to stay politically as neutral as possible because one of the themes I'm tackling with the film is division. The last thing I wanted to be is incredibly divisive with this movie because I want both sides to talk about it. I never wanted to make direct in any way any allegorical connection or anything like that. It was more about allowing the audience to apply their own politics to it. And that's something that he says a lot. Again, he says this about Anora, where he wants it to be a little bit more ambiguous so the audience can take away what they want. When it comes to art, it's understandable that you want people to interpret your art in different ways, and you want everyone to come in with their own interpretation so they can get out of it something personal. But when it comes to art that is politically charged, particularly class politics in Sean Baker's work, it can be a bit dangerous to have a piece of art that can so easily be accepted by the right wing, for example, because it's so ambiguous, to be co-opted by right-wing people, right-wing figures, a right-wing audience that can reinforce their bigoted beliefs or their classist beliefs. And then this interviewer actually brings up this danger of appeasing to both sides, when one side is obviously worse. One side tried to overthrow the government. He says, Baker's like, yeah, but you ask the other side, that's not true. I had friends who were at the Capitol that day and didn't even know what was going on. Is he saying that he had friends at the attempted overthrow after Trump lost to Biden? Did he have friends there who were within that the Trump supporters? Is that what he's saying? Which means that he has Trumpy friends, which means that potentially that he himself is sympathetic with Trump and right-wing issues or policies. He's trying to showcase some, nuance in Trump supporters. Perhaps that's more indicating of him trying to be a little bit more sympathetic from a humanist point of view. And he's kind of just well-meaning. He says he includes characters who are Clinton supporters, so showcasing that, there's gray areas in these red states of people supporting different political parties, not just exclusively Republican, and within the Republican, there's variety. He says, we seem to just point our fingers at the red states thinking they're 100% on the right. At least I feel that way coming from liberal Hollywood and reading leftist news. But this reads to me like someone who might refer to themselves as an independent, someone who could have easily voted for Bernie as much as he could have voted for Trump. When it comes to Anora, he wants the ending to be kind of like a Rorschach test. He doesn't want to preach, as he says in some other interview, I think. Some have pointed out, like here on Vulture, that his politics are more clear in Anora because the Russian oligarch characters are presented as the bad guys. You know, perhaps it's an indication that he is in fact more left-leaning than right-leaning. Maybe an evolution of his politics. Of the Florida Project, which was from 2017, he mentions that the fact that both Democracy Now! And Ben Shapiro loved it and thought it was the best film of that year, that said a lot to me. We're doing the right thing, actually, because we're telling these stories that can be discussed by both sides. And so he's kind of presenting himself as the neutral artist who wants to give both sides some food for thought, you know? Like centrist talking points like that kind of come off as a little bit arrogant, right? Like you have something to teach both sides, the left and the right, like as if those are two extremes. Well, I feel like that is misguided, right? Like Ben Shapiro is an actual awful person, while Democracy Now! Isn't even like an extreme left. You know, they're definitely left, but I think they're a good example of like what, you know, media should live up to in general. You know, they're not like proselytizing their politics like Ben Shapiro is. You know, so based on like the quotes he's given to the media, to outlets, he comes off like as a centrist, perhaps more liberal than conservative. Certainly that's how he comes across with his films. If you go to his Twitter, his posts are protected. Perhaps he's like has experienced some harassment or something because of the tweets he's liked or the accounts he's followed, perhaps. It's hard to verify any of the other follows or tweets because I don't have access to that. But if we go to his Instagram, we are able to see who he's following at least. And it's a lot of accounts here, right? 3,386. Again, we saw a screenshot of this before. A lot of like pro-Israeli government accounts. If you look for Palestine, there is at least one account he follows, very much a pro-Palestine account, you know, in solidarity with Gaza, you know, calling out the Israeli apartheid. Now that's just one account, while there's a lot more Israeli accounts he follows. You can see he also follows Democracy Now! You know, I'm sure we can spend hours here trying to find accounts that are aligned with a variety of political ideologies. Oh look, he follows the Bunny Ranch brothel. People have also said he's followed a lot of porn accounts on Twitter or something. I don't know if that will show up here. He's looking for that inspiration, perhaps, or to better understand the different viewpoints he hopes to illuminate in his films. You know, so I feel like it's a bit misguided to assess and judge Baker based on all the accounts he follows. And I think it's more fruitful to see what he actually says until there's more like real reporting, and until he comes out and addresses anything and his politics more directly. I feel like it's a bit of a fool's errand to try to decipher Sean Baker as a person just based on some social media presence. But I still think it's important to hold him accountable, and maybe it would be good for some reporter or some interviewer to address concerns that fans or others have, especially now that he's becoming more of a presence in Hollywood. He's becoming more of a known director. His film Anora has won Best Picture. Like, it makes sense for, you know, maybe speak out on certain issues more. Like, the trouble with making your art politically ambiguous is that it can, as I said before, attract some bad actors. Now, if you look at another film from this year, The Brutalist, this one as well isn't so straightforward with its messaging, right? There's critics who have accused the film for endorsing a Zionist message, while others feel like it's anti-Zionist. Like, the story begins, right, with the radio broadcast by Israeli Prime Minister from 1948, who declares the birth of the State of Israel. The main character's niece, Sophia, goes to Israel and tries to convince the main character, Laszlo, and his wife to move there. Reading from this article, Laszlo, appears largely indifferent to religion. his prayers are ritualistic rather than spiritual. He's more concerned with his art. Any of the Zionism in the story is more just historical. It's not clearly advocating for a Zionist or anti-Zionist point of view. What the director says is that the film is about a character who flees fascism only to encounter capitalism. That's what the movie is about. But unlike Baker, I think Corbett is a bit more clear with his politics. If we take a look at his speech at the New York Film Critics, he actually mentions No Other Land.
And the last thing I want to say is that it's time to distribute No Other Land. Thank you.
And even the actors he casts in his films are a lot more open about where they stand. Guy Pearce was the only actor at the Oscars with a Free Palestine pin. He played the main antagonist in The Brutalist, of course. The capitalist asshole. Back to Anora. There has been some backlash from some sex workers. All sex workers are not a monolith, so there is differing opinions out there. For example, Marla Cruz did a good piece here for Angel Food magazine. We have this article under the table for Los Angeles Review of Books. We have a BuzzFeed article interviewing a sex worker about her feelings. There's also some more mixed to positive views of the film, and another one from Rolling Stone. I encourage you to read all these articles to get more insight of a variety of sex workers. While some found that Annie's portrayal was authentic and felt true to life, others found it to be more regressive and stereotypical. Here's a quote from Slate. I think Anora did show both the empowering and disheartening aspects of sex work. The cattiness of the club, the rush or the high of a good client, the aftermath. But somehow it felt like it remained on the surface. I had hoped it would have gone beyond fetishization of the profession, but alas, to me, I felt like sex workers were novelty items, once again, for cinematic consumption. Like I said, this movie is going to hit differently for each of us. Some didn't quite buy Annie's motivations. She was presented as a sex worker stripper who had experience, but then she was easily fooled by the rich boy oligarch character. Here's a quote from BuzzFeed. When I initially watched the movie, I got really scared that young guys would, even more so than they already do, think that we would want to date them if they were rich and young and fairly good looking, especially in New York, where everyone wants a girlfriend experience at the strip club. There's a lot of moneyness from younger men who come in and think that we all go on dates with them. They think that we will have this emotional attachment to them and want to be their girlfriends, and that they get really angry when I don't. Now there's a movie that is acted and produced beautifully that shows this happening. There's also different interpretations to the scene where Annie is tied up, the goons, trying to restrain Annie, and Annie's fighting back. Some people found that more similar to, other depictions of sex workers always experiencing violence. Some feel like it didn't treat it seriously, treat it like a comedy scene, while others found it a little more empowering or cathartic to see Annie fight back. To me, I didn't see that scene as humorous as much as it was alarming and scary. It also felt like triumphant in a way to see her be so resilient. Perhaps she was portrayed too naive as a sex worker in her position, but Mike Masson's acting really sold it for me, that she did start falling for this guy to the point where she almost kind of wanted to believe that things will be all right, and that she will be able to have a successful marriage, whether it was because she had some feelings for him or it was more of a just transactional thing. But also, after reading a lot of these different takes, I do see how it could feel a bit condescending. But then again, I don't see Annie as representative of all sex workers, especially because, Baker has made all these different films with, a variety of sex workers, from, the characters in Tangerine, the characters in Red Rocket, the characters in the Florida Project. They all are very distinct from each other, from Annie as well. So again, it was Mike Masson's performance that really kind of allowed me to really get immersed into the storytelling here. And then when it comes to the ending, spoilers, by the way, if you haven't figured it out, that's also a moment of contention. And again, my first instinct, I go over this in my review of Anora, but my first instinct was to feel like Igor was a stand-in for Baker, and that he was the nice guy being redeemed, and that, you know, Baker felt he was deserving of Annie in the end. And that felt a little icky to me. It did feel icky that Anora didn't leave and just, like, you know, take the ring and focus on rebuilding, you know, and focus on recuperating after the harrowing experience. Why would she, you know, fall for Igor so easily? It felt a little bit like a male fantasy, you know. But then a different reading, which I think maybe takes a little bit more work to read it this way, which is maybe not favorable to the film, to ask your audience to work so hard to get a positive ending out of it, to read it as if more that Annie embraces Igor as class allies in the same struggle, and embracing Igor wasn't necessarily a rejection of her independence, but more so of a desire to find some connection in this horrible world, right? And that it didn't necessarily mean that they were going to end up together. After the credits roll, she would go back into her house alone, and her relationship with Igor would just fizzle out as she focuses on her future. And maybe they'll just be friends, you know. But now, you know, after reading, you know, these different reviews, I feel like maybe that is a very generous reading, and it's maybe more likely that the intention was that this love story, as it's so called, as Sean Baker calls it, a Cinderella type of love story, is really about Igor and Annie ending up together in the end. It's messy and complicated and ambiguous, so you could have a generous reading on it. That was Baker's intention. Because of that, it also allows for a lot of negative readings as well. But all in all, it may end up being a net positive, even if it's flawed in its depictions of sex work. Regardless of the fact that, you know, they had consultants, sex work consultants, it's still helmed by Sean Baker. It inherently has a male point of view that leans towards male fantasy, but it also has elements of allyship. I do feel like he humanizes his characters. And in regards to his politics, I feel like maybe he's a centrist. We'll have to wait and see if more comes out regarding his viewpoints. You know, did this film deserve the accolades? I think at the very least it could spark more conversation. Hopefully the discourse does elevate the perspectives of sex workers themselves. What are your thoughts? How did you feel about the Oscars? How did you feel about Anora in general? So what are your thoughts on Sean Baker? Let me know. Let's talk about it in the chat. And for a raw, unedited version of this video and more, check out my Patreon and stay tuned to the channel for more discussions on film and cinema and etc. But for now, that's gonna have to do it. I'll see you next time. Under the moonlight. Bye bye.